now. And yeah, we'll just jump on mute if you've just arrived, please. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us at Linkmate's first event of 2022, Beyond Trauma, Awareness to Action. If you've just joined us, please put yourselves on mute, and then what you'll be able to turn your microphone back on a bit later on when we get to the Q&A. My name is David Titel. I'm the founder at Linkmate, and we will be hosting today's event with Vinay and John. On behalf of the entire team, thanks so much for taking the time to be here with us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country where I'm zooming in from tonight, Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. I'd encourage you to also pay respects to the traditional owners of the land you're on tonight, today, wherever you are in Victoria or Australia. I'd also like to acknowledge the intergenerational trauma and living experiences in this room and indeed across the entire nation. So for today's talk, we're going to explore what trauma and trauma-informed care really is, why it's crucial when providing support to others, and how we can let it lead our discussions with mental health at Linkmate and also just in life. So today, the way it's going to work is after we introduce Vinay and John, we'll have an open discussion with some breakout rooms for about 40 minutes or so before we open up the floor to questions, which should take us to around 1 p.m. And you are more than welcome and encouraged as well to drop any questions you have in the Zoom chat thread as we go along. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Vinay Nair. As Linkmate's Learning and Development Advisor, Vinay coordinates learning that inspires attitude and behaviour change with the goal of creating a positive approach to mental health and well-being. He holds a graduate diploma in counselling and has worked in learning development and consulting for organisations such as the Australian Institute of Professional Counsellors, Mind Australia, and the Department of Education and Training. And joining him is John Millam. John's journey from corporate IT to business and life coaching has really highlighted the power of passion and purpose as a huge opportunity to generate real professional and personal satisfaction. He's a certified trainer in mental health first aid and suicide prevention, holds a certificate in mental health, as well as an advanced diploma in life coaching, and is the founder of John Millam Coaching. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. I'll now throw over to Vinay to share his screen and kick things off.
Thank you, David. Really good to be here, and thank you to everyone who's taken time out in their lunch break, or maybe to have lunch with us. So there's no shame in sitting there and eating your food. If you're looking, if you're as good looking as John, feel free to turn your videos on so that we have some faces to talk to. We all know how tiring talking to ourselves can be, especially when I'm staring at myself. So yeah, like David said, John and I are here to just facilitate a conversation around trauma-informed practice. John and I have known each other really well over the past 2 years. Even though we haven't met each other, we pretty much kind of spend quite a bit of time talking about all things trauma related, I guess mental health related. John has a very specialized focus on suicide prevention and have a very strong interest in improving the well-being of those who might be struggling with some form of stigma or marginalization. So that's where we have some common threads. So I'm really grateful to be able to present I guess interactive session to each one of you. So feel free to type away into the comments as and when you think you might have a question that you want to ask of either of us on any of the topics we're discussing about today, or maybe a comment. More than happy to take either or, and we'll if it is relevant to the slide, we'll definitely answer it right then and there, right? And we'll just throw it across each other. So I'm hoping that everyone can see my slides. And before I get started, right? I know that David has given a really honorable acknowledgement of country, but I also just want to say that when coming to Australia and going on this journey where I was looking at my mental health more intently, made me realize not only about my challenges with my own traumatic experiences, but also how every day Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population have to live with with not being acknowledged for for the land that is truly theirs, right? So I just want to take a minute to to pay my respects to that, and also pay my respects to anyone who's joining us from from an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander background. And also want to acknowledge that we won't be able to have a conversation around trauma-informed practice or what trauma-informed care looks like without acknowledging people's lived experience. John, do you want to jump in and add anything to that?
Yeah, just hi guys. And echoing the privilege it is to be here that Vinay was saying. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. And I'm coming from Gay Marigold Lands in Sydney, and I would absolutely invite all of those with a lived experience of trauma, which is likely to be most of us in some way, right? At least some understanding of either a personal experience or the experience of someone we love having a significant trauma within their life, whether it's currently, they're currently recovered from it, or it's dormant or whatever. The lived experience, the wisdom that you bring after having those experiences and moving on is a valuable resource, not just to yourself and your life, informing you the way you live. It's a really valuable resource for the rest of us, right? So I would encourage you, first of all, to look after yourself, to make decisions that are going to keep you safe today, as we talk about subjects that may or may not be triggering. But it's really also important that you feel free to offer your wisdom from a lived experience space, and know that it's going to enrich this discussion and this meeting. So I acknowledge the journey we've all taken and the pain that's been there along the way, and the use that we can make of that pain now. I hope that doesn't sound unforgiving or uncaring, but it's a great resource. All right, sorry, Vinay. Would you like me to keep going or what?
Oh, good. Yeah, you want to introduce everyone to the first breakout activity, right?
Yeah, let's get to know each other a little bit while we discuss something in our lives that is massively significant. Now, it could be like the first time you tasted gelato ice cream, which is one of my significant events, or it could be something related to trivial things like having children, or meeting your partner or whatever. It depends. What I would like you to do, though, is obviously the events aren't good or bad. It's just what your perspective around them. What I would like, I'd ask you, as Vinay or David sets up a breakout room, we're going to share some time with a group. I'm not sure how many. Are we going to do twos or threes?
Twos and threes.
Yeah.
Twos and threes.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So feel free to share an event, but share it from this way. Let's not worry about the narrative too much, because I really would love to know the feeling and the wisdom, like the lesson learned, the emotions experienced, and the learning you gain from that whole process. See if you can share that kind of wisdom with your partner, and then be as brave as you want about the feelings that you had around that moment.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Yeah, and we don't need to go for too long. Each one of you will have about 2 minutes to to share, and also think about what kind of a choice would you make if you went through that same experience today? Is it going to be any different, right? So just some just some surface level reflection, as much as you feel comfortable sharing with your partner. And the person wearing the brighter shirt in the room goes first, right? The rooms are open. You have about 6 minutes, 6 to 7 minutes. We'll send you a quick reminder. So go ahead and join the rooms when you're ready.
Brilliant.
Let's move a few people around who are not joining rooms. That's totally okay.
It depends on their software levels.
That's it. That's it.
Are you moving them now, Vinay?
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Most of them who have joined a room have a partner with them. Okay, so that's good. And the others are just hanging around here. That's all good. We had a quick influx of people coming in, Dave, in the first 5 minutes. That was good.
Yeah, that's promising. We've got some participants here in this room. Should we go around and perhaps share a life-changing event here, or how do you want to play it?
Yeah, I mean, if they're around, anyone
Yeah.
here want to share an experience of something life-changing that happened in your lives? They might just be listening in.
So Jane can't be interactive.
Yeah, no worries at all, Jane.
That's all.
Thanks
good,
for coming along.
It's all right. What about Nina, Leanne, Ramon, Zunera? Dave, would you say the experience with your with your father is probably the life-changing part for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, my life completely changed course after that. So for those who don't know, I grappled with a lot of mental health challenges throughout my time at uni when I was studying my undergrad. And I didn't really feel like I didn't feel like I had a friend that I could turn to talk about these things with. I was living at college, so we were on campus there, and it was I think it's definitely improved since then, but back then mental health was still stigmatized quite a lot, and yeah, I just found it incredibly difficult to open up to anyone. So it wasn't really until I opened up to my dad for the first time when things started to change, for not only for me but also for him, because he had traditionally been a very stoic man and closed off quite emotionally. So I didn't really know what to expect when I opened up to him, but it actually was really powerful and cathartic to do that, because he listened to me, and he actually opened up to me for the very first time and shared really intimate and personal details about his journey as a migrant and sort of trauma throughout that experience, as well as going through a separation and divorce, and his struggle with depression as well. So it was really I think initially it was quite confronting, but ultimately really cathartic, as I said, for us to hold that space for each other and sort of talk through these things and support one another. Which, as I reflect on it again, there's not many people that I know who have conversations like this with their dad or with their parents at all. So to be able to, for my dad to feel comfortable and sort of safe to share that with me, was really special, and I'm really proud of him. And we've really blossomed, I think, in a big way as a result of that. So yeah, does anyone else have an experience, a life-changing experience or an event that they'd want to share before we bring everyone back in?
But I think everyone's got 2 more minutes before they can before we'll get them back in.
No worries.
John would have way too many life-changing events. What stands out, John, today?
Well, yeah, today's easily like another life-changing event. If you're flexible of mind, right, then life-changing events happen regularly, right? Because I don't hang on to the path I was on. I embrace the new. But here's an exercise that's worth, at least from my perspective, worth doing, which is work out the times where you were genuinely unconditional in your actions. Right. So see if you can put fingers on things like unconditional love. When have you experienced unconditional love? When you have given unconditional regard, in like absolutely, a genuine attempt to be unconditional. Could be, and doing that exercise, you realize humans don't operate unconditionally that often, right? At least, in my perspective. So things like the birth of your children can often be an unconditional experience, but not necessarily. For instance, it's an interesting thing. Imagine, having faced with the loss of a child, or a situation where the mother is at risk. That must be a very conditional place to be. So, but yeah, for me, I had an experience of unconditional love when my kids came. That was a very changing experience. And then when
you want to name one of the children in particular, John?
Well, how about my second son? He was the first one wouldn't come. He was stubborn, right? I mean, everyone's coming back now, but my second son, he was born with a knot in his cord. And he came out, he was absolutely beautiful, 9/9 APGAR or 10/9 APGAR. He was just a glowing child, but a miracle baby. But he's been pretty relaxed about life ever since, right? So I wonder if that has an effect. But I remember thinking, I asked the midwife, I said, what does that usually mean? She said, well, we don't usually know because they don't often survive. So it was one of those things where you just went, wow, sucked your breath in and appreciated being on the right side of the ledger for a change.
Thank you. Everyone's back from the breakout rooms. Any words coming to people from sharing their experience? Would anyone hear anything that they want to share quickly before we? It's all right. You can feel free to type away into the chat. But thank you for those who who went into the room and and probably shared space with a stranger too. The reason we thought an activity like that would be useful is because a really strong relationship is often quite important if you want to facilitate healing for people, right? And that's something that I've kind of lived with throughout my career in in this space so far. And then as if you're going to be a practitioner, or if you're going to be supporting your loved ones, or if you're going to be supporting peers in their own journey through recovery and healing, it is important for each one of us to understand our own story. What diversity do we bring into the equation? What's our culture? What's our beliefs about recovery, right? And what are our triggers and our vulnerabilities? Because once we start to become a bit more aware about that, then it makes it easier for us to support another, right? So what really is trauma when you think about it, right? Because what you've shared there is a life experience. But what trauma really is anything that results from experiences that often can overwhelm an individual's capacity to process the event and to cope. And it doesn't have to be a series of events. It can often be a single event. And there are some examples here of where those events can come from, whether it's from childhood, whether it's through transition, whether it's through, childbirth, like John was talking about, or, sometimes it can just be witnessing and being part of an event. John, anything you want to add about trauma?
Yeah, it doesn't. It's important to understand perspective at this point. Trauma doesn't. We can't judge trauma. One event to someone else who navigates quite simply, quite easily, can be an absolute disaster to another person, right? It's their perspective. So from an observational point of view, from someone who is trying to be aware of trauma, it doesn't really hold up if we try to classify it, as a type of trauma, right? You can't say abuse will always be traumatic, sticks and stones, calling people names won't be. That just doesn't work. Individuals are impacted by a whole range of things. So don't try to classify trauma. What we want to do is, when we understand what is trauma, it's anything, right, that leads to someone losing their ability to control their responses. So, fight, flight responses, right? Anything that is really fearful, that puts someone into a fear state. What happens now, if this is occurring in childhood, and most people encounter something that is difficult to deal with in childhood, it creates an impact. It's almost like it puts a stamp on us, and they call this stamp ACEs. Has anyone heard of ACEs? Yep. Adverse childhood experiences, right? Some of you would be studying that or whatever. So the sense of an adverse childhood experience can be about anything. Can you imagine the world from a child's perspective and think about what isn't scary and is scary? It's not going to be the same as an adult, is it? It's a very different perspective. So the important thing about adverse childhood experiences is they are accumulative, and you can carry them for a longitudinal, period. This is a great slide up there now, which Vinay's put up, which kind of gives us a sense, right? If you might have coped with it at the time, which is fantastic, right? So everyone starts out on having an experience of something. Some people might be able to tap into resources that are resilient, so that they just keep going on. That event gets catalogued in the memory, and you move on. You don't get triggered. Some people may be triggered or might have an adverse experience of that event, and then they go through, they get it addressed. They might access therapy or good friends, or have some good advice, or just spend some time healing. And whatever they do, it works, and that person comes up and recovers. And the word recovery is both a noun and a verb, if you get my drift, right? Sometimes people end up in the ditch. I call it, the black hole of being impacted by these traumas, and then they just don't get out of it, right? And we call that a persistent trauma, right, or a chronic condition.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the one, that we often hear about, say, childhood sexual, abuse survivor syndrome, where something is hidden and then it revealed later, and that becomes a problem later.
And that's when you have the connection towards, to stress and the way people cope and the health outcomes that are relating to it. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah.
Often the way we cope, or how we cope, and our physical and mental well-being has some form of connection to some sort of trauma or traumatic event that we experience. Maybe we don't see it as a traumatic event, but definitely it could have been in our lives, right?
Yeah, and it's really important here to understand the physical manifestation, like illness, is a dis-ease, right? Like the word disease. it's, you know, what we're talking about is you are not easy anymore. You're not in ease, right? You've got some dysregulation, some disconnection or misunderstanding going on. And that can easily begin from stress or trauma, right? And then manifests as a physical outcome. So, you know, the American College of Surgeons indicate that they think about 80% of all chronic illness relates to stress or the anxiety around stress or fear responses and things like trauma. So it's really important.
And what makes it even more complex is the fact that there's a number of significant stigmas or beliefs that are associated with how people experience trauma, right? People are often quite reluctant and avoidant to seeking help. John and I have seen that with a lot of men. And David, through your story, you talked about stoicism with your father as well, as a result of what the consequences of disclosure might be, right? Is I really needed some support when I needed to talk about something I experienced in my childhood, that without knowing how to disclose, or whether to feel ashamed or embarrassed. Sometimes it can be a lack of trust. Now, when you're practicing trauma-informed practices, overcoming that and trying to think about what a relationship looks like can often be beneficial, because people might have had a lot of negative experiences with professionals.
So,
sometimes, go on.
Sorry, Vinay, it's just really important there, because trauma-informed care is exactly what Vinay was just saying, right? It's about overcoming the obstacles of these elements, right? Stigma elements are a form of obstacle, whether it's shame, whether it's anxiety, whether it's some form of avoidance, right? What we deal with trauma in a way to prevent the shame or the stigma from getting to us. Now, here's the challenge in terms of trauma-informed care. Both the person who is the carer, say you guys might have a friend who has childhood trauma that's being triggered, and the person who is having the experience of trauma, both people are generally interested in avoiding the discussion. So you've got trauma that no one is interested in talking about. Does that make sense? Like, carers want to avoid other people's trauma as well, right? As well as because they don't want their own to be brought forward, right? So in terms of trauma-informed care, if you are working with people in an environment that encourages trauma, you need to really focus. You need to resist the desire to let it go through to the keeper. Does that make sense? To let it just miss out, right? And instead, you need to step up and put effort into operating in a trauma-informed way, which is like increased care, increased sensitivity, increased mitigation.
Creating a safe space, empowering the individual to have an active voice, right? Advocating alongside them, respecting their experience. And by no means does it mean that they have to talk about their trauma, right? Trauma-informed care does not mean that the trauma has to be disclosed. It's better off that trauma is talked about in a setting where the person who the trauma is being disclosed to has the tools and resources to be able to do anything. But each one of us in our everyday roles as friends, as family members, as peers, as practitioners, can still be sensitive about what we are, the language that we're using. We can be transparent, we can be trustworthy, and we can provide some stability and consistency, which leads to through to creating a safe space. Safety can mean different things, right? We all know what it means to create physical safety, right? If I'm walking on a floor, if the floor is slippery, yes, it's not going to be safe. But what does it mean to have psychological and emotional safety? As we grow through our lives, that means different things for different people.
It's such a good point, Vinay, because one of the things we want to do is with trauma-informed care, we want to be understand that the principles both involve trust and safety, but also choice, right? So we want people to have access to all the resources they need, but we also want them to choose to open up or not open up, to feel empowered to do that. So instead of the usual way, oh, look, we want to fix you, it's what do you need from us, right? And you guys have talked about trauma language. For anything that focuses on empowerment, on respecting the person at the middle, is part of trauma informed. So somebody is not, oh, well, you weren't abused as a child, or you didn't suffer childhood abuse. What you did was you were a child who had experiences of abuse in their life, right? And if you get it, make the person the center rather than the abuse. So childhood isn't an adjective to describe an abusive life. Abuse is something that occurred to a child. That's just one example. We'll go into more, but it's based on the principles of trauma, which Vinay will be getting to in a minute, I think.
Yeah.
What do we got next?
You got the principles of trauma on screen, right?
Oh, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, that's my fault. I was getting
So we're talking about safety, we're talking about trust, talking about choice. And here's some questions for you to start thinking about, because we're about to go into another activity where I want you to think about how can we replace some of the traditional practices that we have, that we currently use in our everyday life or in our role as a peer to support each other. Right.
Just a quick check-in. Does everyone understand how those things are principled? You know, it's creating a safe space, emotional, physical, and psychological safety, creating trust, which is about beginning with respect and earning with consistent authenticity, earning the right to trust. Choice, about giving them the choice over their own life, making them the center of it. And of course, collaboration is, I do things with you, not to you or for you, right? Yeah. And of course, empowerment, again, you know, tell me what you need, not let me tell you, right?
Yeah.
And of course, diversity, the nature of safety is everyone welcome. You know, so, you know, you can't be a safe space and turn people away just because of a difference, right? So,
yeah. And the other key thing to remember as you're thinking of applying some of these principles in your everyday is to remember that it's not about distinguishing the symptoms from the impact of the trauma, right? The symptoms that we notice in others, or often the way we label or we judge what we see, is often the response to the trauma, right? So here's a little exercise for you to think about. So if some of you can just, if you're on a computer, take a screenshot of it, or if you're on your phone, take a quick screen grab, because what I would like you to do is, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms now, is to think about what is a trauma-informed approach based on what you've just heard in the past 30 minutes. So we're not expecting an expert answer, right? But in your roles as to what brings you here today, what would a more trauma-informed approach look like to one of these scenarios? Right?
and draw heavily on the principles.
On the principles.
Yeah.
Right. So and when we come back, I want to hear what what some of your answers might be. So the rooms are open. Give you another 5-6 minutes to kind of just have a bit of a discussion. If you get through all of the questions, that's fine. If you don't, that's also okay. See you all soon.
No, you can't have me, Vinay.
Or I can't have you joining into breakout room, is it?
Yeah. I'd love to talk to Nanad about his Venturian man in an apple. It's like an interesting symbol.
It is, right?
And in terms of trauma-informed language, you know, did you want to, you know, sort of wing a little bit on that, or?
You know, what we just send them into the room about.
We
Oh
could
yeah,
go,
but so,
we could go
sorry.
through the exercise just with Ramon, Ninad, and Jane in this room, so it could still sort of. Was that you were talking about, John?
No, I was just saying, because just like people were saying, oh, what language do I use, right? So what we've given them principles, but not sort of examples of language. Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
So-
Welcome, Walter. Thanks for coming along. Why don't we do that just with the time that we have here? This can be sort of a breakout room of our own, and we can sort of talk through how to replace traditional practices here.
Yeah, let's do that. We'll just bring up the screen. You'll be able to see that. All right. So even in Linkmate, David, what do you think you can do? You know, so how can we change the focus of goals being defined by service providers and the focus being on reducing symptoms? Because often I think, you know, people reach out to Linkmate because, you know, they experience some sort of anxiety, depression, whatever it might be, right? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think in contrast to sort of conventional approaches where the focus is, you know, as you've got on the slide, to reduce symptoms or to reduce what's, you know, wrong, quote unquote, our approach is certainly more to take a strengths-based focus and draw attention to, you know, what's working well. And what are the strengths and joys that you know, make people who they are, and how in the past they have leaned on them and their self-care tools and techniques to feel better and feel themselves. So it's not so much about reducing symptoms, but more about maximizing wellness and joy in that sense.
Which is sorry to interrupt, Dave. I just wanted to refocus, right? Because that's a brilliant approach, right? It's a wonderful approach. But how do you express that in a trauma-informed way? Right? So you've said, oh, I'll work on your strengths. But again, right, what you're actually doing is judging weakness. So, you know, oh, when you say this is a strength, this is a weakness, you're judging that person, right? So trauma-informed care needs to be careful about how we describe the attributes of a person. So what I would say is, well, at the moment, at the moment, we think these are resources you can use most effectively instead of these are weaknesses or strengths. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I love that. Healing happens in therapy. You hear that all the time. Where does healing actually happen?
Through connection, I guess.
Within?
Yeah, the person heals, right? And so we need to think of, okay, well, how do I bring the person to the middle of my understanding? Healing is something you will do when you get the therapy or situation that's right for you. So, and that implies that gives them the power of choice. It gives them the power to be, they actually have the responsibility to live their own life, as well as they are the center. They're not being judged about whether they, you know, if healing happens in therapy and you don't heal, what happens then, right? Everyone says, well, you're resisting healing, right? The therapist never gets into trouble. But same with marketing material, using Christmas or Father's Day or Mother's Day. So if you say Father's Day and you say, I'm reaching out to all people who to acknowledge their fathers on a day like that, or to acknowledge the things your father used to do if he hadn't passed or whatever. And of course, that not everyone even has an unawareness of father or an understanding of father.
Yeah, or they might have, you know, that their experience with their parents might have been quite traumatic to them.
So that, what are you acknowledging when you do that? Oh, that my father was a complete, disaster, right? It's, and that even me saying that might, with present, may be a problem. I'm framing it as a hypothetical, but you just got to watch any language that is aggressive, abusive, any language that describes or frames violence or a situation of emotional, spiritual, or physical violence. That language is problematic. Now, you
It's too
can't,
generalizing.
yeah, you can't tell people not to say or do things. What you can ask them to do, which is what today's about, is what is your focus going to be? Are you going to make a decision that takes you a little bit longer or a little bit more depth because it's trauma informed? There, I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's so good. Often when when people come to a service, and initially when they have an interview or an assessment process,
yeah,
right? There's someone sitting there who's trying to find the right practitioner for them, and they themselves are often through asking those questions are constantly re-traumatizing the individual.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which can often be quite problematic.
I was watching late night. I had a bit of a binge on Disney Channel, and I was watching Cloak and Dagger, which is like a sort of funny superhero, sort of Marvel movie series. And they were talking about the young people who are the heroes had rescued a whole bunch of trafficked women, and the script was really basic, but it didn't hide anything, right? It wanted you to feel angry, so it said things that made you angry, right? And it wanted to feel you to feel sad, and it said things that made you sad. So it was nothing. It wasn't wrong. It was just very basic. So they were talking about women who were trafficked, and of course, police arrested them for prostitution, so that they would get leads out of them. And you're so angry at it, right? Because of the language is so obviously designed to trigger me. And I was thinking about how that relates to today. And I said, it's almost like a case study. Script writers can immediately trigger people's trauma or people's judgment or people's prejudices, right? And I'm thinking that's where we should be at. People should understand that the script of their everyday conversations can trigger that, right? And we should be understanding that, if I want a purpose to hurt someone or engage someone or get someone angry, I can do it. But I don't. I actually want them to feel good about life, so I should be scripting it this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Disney Channel was a real learning opportunity for me.
Who knew, right?
Who knew? Right?
When you're staying up late at night, that was your opportunity.
I'm a better person for it.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for having that conversation. Can I hear some thoughts? What what came up in people's conversation? What can we do in organizations where there's a bit of a hierarchical or a compliance focus on how someone asking for help needs to be supported to to get help in that organization? What can we do to make it more trauma informed? Any ideas? How can we reduce some of the compliance when people access support for their well-being or for something traumatic that they might have experienced?
You're welcome to unmute yourself and share, or you can add
we're
your
opening
answers
up
in the
to
thread.
Q&A. We don't have much more to kind of throw at you. So
we discussed, hi Vinay, hi David, hi John,
Hey.
nice to meet you. This session's been loads of, I don't know if fun's the appropriate word, but I've been having a blast. I enjoy learning, even if it is about trauma-informed care. But anyway, our group discussed the notion of, you know, our assessment tools and our assessment forms being a little less quantitative based
Yeah.
and a little bit more quality based. I know from personal experience when I've been asked to rate my mood or my sense of usefulness on a scale of 1 to 5, I've felt like giving a 4 doesn't quite tell that person where I'm really at, if you understand where I'm where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
So a little bit more open-ended questions with our assessment forms. I mean, I know that sounds like a pretty basic.
No, it's a great idea, Marie. It's a great idea. I love, because qualitative measurement is the only way to know an individual's perspective, right? So, you know, it's interesting because that score, 0 to 5, it's called a subjective unit of distress, right? So it's literally saying, don't measure me against someone else. It's completely me, right?
Yeah.
And so the only way a 4 makes sense is by saying, well, what does a 4 mean to you? Right. And that's actually a very trauma-informed care response, right? Because I'm saying, hang on, you're the expert in you, so you better tell me what's going on. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's really powerful. You talked about you know, the people assessing you. This is a case where a TIC, you need to be aware of the cultural diversity of it. So if someone from one country is asked why are you, you know, how happy are you at the moment with a traumatic event, say the loss of a loved one or something, right? And then a person in another country, one will be sad and one will be happy, and it's completely culturally relevant, right? Because of the way they celebrate or you know, bereavement or acknowledge the loss of loved ones or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Or mourning. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, that's a really good point there. Thank you for sharing that.
So, you know, your assessment forms, and also, you know, what is the journey that the person who is, you know, who you're supporting is going through, right? If you're working in an organization, you'll definitely see some sort of a system that the person has to navigate in order to get the support that they need. That now compliance might come into it. It might be hierarchical. Are we really encouraging individuals to open up and be vulnerable if you're saying that, you know, you have to jump through these hoops before you can get the support, right?
Absolutely. I love to ask the question, what is non-trauma about, non-trauma informed about, you know, compliance?
Sometimes having to rehash out events to justify why you need help, that's not a very trauma-informed.
Absolutely, yeah. And it makes no differentiation for the different perspective. You know, the definition of trauma is something that happened to you that overwhelmed me, right? It may have been me having to fill out a form in my, you know, as a kid, right? So I'm overwhelmed by the very nature of compliance, right? So, but it doesn't differentiate. It doesn't say, well, you know, this is my perspective and this is yours. It just says there's one perspective. So while we understand the nature of effectiveness, it's a balance. All things in life are subjective, right? Dynamic tension. So we want to be efficient, but we have to be trauma-informed at doing it, because how efficient is it to lose someone, right? Because they've been, you know, re-traumatized because of something we've done. So, you know, I know that's an extreme example, but you get it. I'd love to hear what you guys thought about healing happens. So I think, you know, what's the trauma-informed element that is equivalent to that?
If you take that healing happens in therapy is the you know, traditional form of approach, How else does healing happen if it doesn't happen in therapy? As a therapist myself, I know, I have some, there's a power imbalance in the room.
Yeah, and there's a classic case of course healing happens in therapy. No, where does healing happen?
Is it
Well,
one
sorry.
No,
Go on.
that's all right. Judy.
sorry, is it one we listen actively?
No,
Yeah.
no, yeah, but healing happens in some place, but it's not in therapy. Where does healing happen?
Yeah, listening, active listening is a key component to it. Yeah, through natural supports, through choices and actions of the individual in their life domains.
Well, I love that. I love this question because it goes to the core of what trauma-informed care is, which is really just about how we respond to this challenge of understanding humans are the center of everything. So, and we're not asking you to change culture. What we're asking you is to change your perspective, right? So healing happens in people. Anything they do doesn't cause them to, doesn't apply healing to it. A doctor giving you a pill is not a guarantee of healing. A psychologist giving you a session doesn't heal you. You heal you, right? And these resources are used by the person to get an outcome for themselves. So, it's the old classic. You break a leg, they put plaster on. The plaster comes off, you've got to rehab it. If you never do another day's exercise, you're as good as broken anyway, right? You have to heal your own leg, right? And you have to heal your own mind. It's exactly the same. But you need help doing it.
John, Vinay, what do you think of the idea that in trauma-informed care that we start looking at healing as a fluid journey of therapeutic journey, in that it can happen at various stages along the way where you have, where you incorporate relapse, stories of relapse, and then overcoming again and recovering again.
Even the word relapse seems like it's a failure, right? I mean, and sometimes healing, I hear there's a spiritual connotation to it, right?
Okay.
But those are the words that we use traditionally, and that's where we need to become more aware that how do we describe someone else's experience? If you're not sure how to describe someone's experience, I think the best thing for us as helpers to do is to keep quiet and to listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I only use that word because personally I've come across it.
Yeah,
and
it's quite common.
I don't take offense to it when it's used within the context of my own.
And that's a good point, Marie, because the fact that we've trained ourselves to be tolerant of poor choice of language doesn't mean we shouldn't practice better choices, right? So I just think,
on board.
Yeah, the classic, and that's not intended at you, that's all of us, right? Because what about the idea of self-abuse, right? Or self-harm? Self-harm, right? That, like, what? Like, somebody is choosing to interact in their body in their own way. I don't necessarily see it as anything but a worry, right? But somebody else is expressing themselves. What they need is not help to stop. What they need is help to understand there are other choices.
Yeah.
And that's what trauma-informed language is. What can you do to encourage through your casual language them to feel like they own their own choices? And I know we haven't got much time, but that to me is probably one of the big points of this whole trauma-informed focus, right? Respecting the right of other people to be their best choice, to make a choice for themselves, whether it's your perspective or not. So
so it's choice.
I'll get off the bandwagon.
No, no. I mean, we're happy to stay around and have a bit more of further conversation. But I know that some people might have another meeting to get to at 1 o'clock. So there are some useful resources which I'll share with David. So if you want to explore further in this space, here's some good articles for you to look at. Blue Knot is a really good website for you to start looking at understanding what trauma-informed practice looks like. And if you're looking at some leaders or thought leaders in the space, Bessel van de Kolk, Peter Levine, he's written a really good book called Walking the Tiger, Dan Siegel, and also Olga Phoenix has created a really cool self-care wheel that that might be quite helpful if you want to explore in this space. And the last thing that I'll add before I hand it back to David is that if you want to see what trauma-informed language is not, right? Grab one of the safe work publications on bullying or harassment, and look at how they write their fact sheets around it. You will start to see a lot of blaming or naming or whatnot, and think about and a good exercise for you to think about, okay, how can I put this forward in a more supportive tone or language, right? And it's a journey that all of you are on through Linkmate, right? So if anything in this is wanting for you to process some more, remember there's always a peer at Linkmate that you can reach out to and get some support from. Over to you, David.
Thank you so much for that, Vinay. And thank you everyone for coming along today. It's really important for us to understand a bit better how we can bring these principles to conversations about trauma with people. And I really want to extend a very big thank you to Vinay and John for joining us. I, for one, have walked away with a lot of insight around how to foster a bit more safety and collaboration in conversations. And everyone, I have made a note, has got 3 pieces of homework. So I want you to think about how you can replace traditional practices of trauma. So we talked about assessment tools that Marie, you brought up, and how we can sort of reframe that and replace it in our experiences. To read about ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, and just familiarize yourself with how that can actually bring about trauma throughout life, and also how you can bring one of those trauma-informed principles of practice to your next conversation with someone. So they were safety, trustworthiness, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. So there's definitely something that everyone can take away from this session. Massive thank you from all of us to you for sitting on this call and contributing your ideas and fantastic questions. So yeah, to wrap up, I'll leave you with this. At the end of the day, your self-care is absolutely crucial. So it's important to prioritize, your own mental health and well-being. And we've opened up potentially different cans for each of us. So if you need to process it, if you have the time, feel free to connect with your friends, your loved ones, with a mate on Linkmate as well. It's not a crisis service, but it is available to you for emotional support if you want to connect to someone who can relate. And you don't need to find a solution. As we sort of saw today, it's really not about fixing things. It's just about sitting with someone or finding someone who can sit with you throughout and foster that safe space. And yeah, that's it for today. If you have any other questions, we're happy to hang around. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Renee. Thanks, John.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.
Thanks so much.
Have a great week.
You too.
Bye.
Cheers.
See ya.
See ya.